So this video is going to talk about sign diagrams and how we can construct them if we're just given an equation. First thing we need to talk about is the null factor law. And the null factor law states that A times by B is equal to 0, then A or B must be equal to 0. Of course, you could have both A and B equal to 0. Now, what this means for constructing our sign diagrams, when we're trying to find a sign diagram, the first thing that we are looking for here is our positions of x, or our values of x, for which the equation or the function is equal to 0. So the null factor law comes into play because when we have something like these two brackets here, the null factor law would show that if this whole thing is equal to 0, then we only need to figure out when each of these brackets are equal to 0. So let's get started. First step is always to draw this horizontal line. And then our second step is to find those zeros or the points where it is undefined. In this case, we're just going to have zeros. So our first opportunity where it's going to be equal to 0 is when x is equal to -4. Because if this whole function is equal to 0, then either of these brackets being equal to 0 will satisfy that. 1 at -4. Then in our second set of brackets, it would be at x is equal to 2. Now, in order to find whether we have a plus or a minus on each of our spaces on our sign diagram, what we do is we just input a variable number in place of x on either side of these critical points. So either side of these zeros. So let's start off with f of -5, which is going to be substituting in -5 wherever x appears, which is going to give us -5 plus 4, -1, -7, which gives us 7. Now that is a positive, so we've got positive here. The second one that we're going to look at is going to be something in between -4 and 2, so let's just do f of 0. That is going to have 4 and -2 is -8. Because that's negative, put a negative here. Finally, let's just go with f of 4. So we're going to have 4 plus 4, and we're going to have, let's say 2. So we get 8 times by 2, which is 16, which is a positive. So we have our sign diagram complete. So step 1, draw that line. Step 2, find your zeros, so x values where the function is equal to 0. And then step 3 is to substitute your other values. We're going to do 2 more examples for the cases where we're looking for just the zeros. So drawing our line, let's look, thinking about our null factor law again. We've got 2 factors, which is the x and x take 3. So if that's going to all be equal to 0, it will be equal to 0 when x is equal to 0 here. So that's our first one. And it's also going to be equal to 0 when x take 3 equals 0. So when x is equal to 3, 3 take 3 is 0, that satisfies it. So that is our second one there. Let's substitute into our function. Let's look to the left of 0 and let's say negative 1, f of negative 1, so that is equal to negative 1 times negative 1 take 3, which will give us negative 1 times y, negative 4, which is positive 4. So we have a positive y value on the left of 0. Let's look at f of 1 now, which is in the middle. So we have 1 times y, 1 take 3, 1 times y negative 2, which is negative 2. So that is a negative. Finally, let's look at f of 5. And remember that these numbers are completely randomly chosen, but they do fit within either side of the zeros or between the zeros. So choose the ones that are easiest to calculate for you. So we've got 5 take 3, 5 and 2, which is 10. That is a positive number, so we're going to be above the x-axis, so we have a positive again. Finally, we're going to look at this option here. So first step, draw that horizontal line. Now looking at our factors, we've effectively got 3 factors, but in reality there's only 2 that we're going to consider. So we've got, if this function is going to equal to 0, then 2 has to equal 0, which is impossible, or x take 3 squared has to equal 0. So in this case, we're not really too stressed about the squared when we're finding the zeros, because 0 squared is going to be 0 anyway. So if x take 3 is 0, that means that x will be equal to 3. So we've only got 1 0 in this situation. And that's something to take note of. Now let's look either side of this, and let's say f of 2 is equal to 2 times 2 take 3 squared, which is equal to 2 times y negative 1 squared, which will give us 2 times 1, which is 2. That is a positive, so I'm positive on the left side of this. Let's look at something above 3, so let's go with f of 4, 2 times 4 take 3 squared, 2 times 1 squared, which is again 2. Now, interesting result here because we've got 2 positives. If you're thinking about what the graph might look at this, we're starting above the x-axis. It's going to be a quadratic, which you might notice. It's going to be coming down, and it's just going to touch and then come straight back up. So we do have a single point when x is equal to 3, where y will be equal to 0, but in the smallest amount to the left or right of that, it's going to be above the x-axis. We're going to have positive all round.